So now that we know a little bit about the kinds of layers that go in the layers palette, let's look at the settings we have here on the palette itself. I have one of the Moho demo projects open because they're a good example of how complex a Moho project can get. So far, all we've really looked at is the Add Layer button here, but let's take a look at the buttons next to it. First of all, I'm going to use the layer visibility setting here to hide everything except one layer so we can focus on it. So the button next to Add Layer is Duplicate Layer. This takes whatever layer or group you have selected and makes a copy of it. I'll just move that layer over so we can see it. Next, there's the Reference Layer button, which is similar but different in an important way. This will make a copy of the selected layer. I'll move it so we can see it. But in this case, the layer is still referencing the original. You can see the original gets this red dot when I have the reference layer selected. So that means any change I make to the original layer will show up in the reference copy as well. If you ever want to break the reference, you can right-click and choose Break Layer Reference, and now it's just a regular duplicate. And of course, we can use the Delete button to delete layers. Now, something important to note about duplicate and reference is that they work on whole groups as well as layers. For a good example, let's find the character here. Now, this is a complex character made up of a bunch of layers rigged with lots of bones. But if we go to the main group, we can create a reference. And we have a copy of the character complete with all the animation that's already on it. Now, something key to know about animation that's referenced is if we alter the animation in the original, it updates the reference. But if you change the animation in the reference, it won't affect the original. So you can customize the animation in a reference. If I want to get it back to how it was, I go to the main character layer with the bones, which was what I changed. Then I right-click and choose Sync All Channels to Original. So that just reset all the channels to match the original, including its position. So let me move that again. And there you can see it's back in sync. While we're talking about channels, let's look at this column here. These boxes enable the timeline visibility for a layer. So normally, the way the timeline works is it only shows the animation channels for the layer you have selected. But there are times when you may want to be able to see keyframes you've set on a different layer. If you enable timeline visibility in the Layers palette, that layer's channel will stay visible in the timeline even if you have something else selected. You see it's labeled there. But if you want to make it even easier to tell your layers apart, you can assign them different colors over here on the layer palette. You can assign the layer a color by clicking on the square in this color column. That gives the layer a color in the layers palette and in the timeline when you have its channel visibility on. So those are the columns that are visible by default, but if you right-click, there are some other columns you can turn on if you want. You can turn on comments, which are text notes that you can leave for yourself or team members to understand what the layer is for. There's also tags, which are terms that you can attach to a layer to use to search for it later. We'll look at searching in a second. The last here is kind, which just spells out for you what kind of layer it is. So you can enable or disable whatever columns you need. When you have a column enabled, you can actually sort the layer stack using that column. By default, layers are arranged by the order they're stacked visually on the stage. But if you click this arrow in the corner, you're able to click the column names to sort based on that column. So sorting might help you track down the layer you're looking for, but what's really going to be helpful is filtering, which is like searching. You choose what you want to search for on this drop-down here. For example, we could search for kind contains, and then type in bone, and it will only show bone layers. So you can do a search using any of these characteristics, including tags or comments, which you can add to layers yourself if you need a really specific way to find a layer. The next thing to know about is layer comps. Layer comps are basically a way to save the visibility state of a set of layers. So say I hide everything and I just want to have the background visible. I can define this state as a new layer comp with this button here and click New Layer Comp and name it. Then I can also hide or show all layers again from this menu. Then if I ever need to go back to just the background layers, I go to the Layer Comps menu, and then you have a choice between Show Layer Comp or Expose Layer Comp. Show Layer Comp will turn on visibility for the layers. Expose Layer Comp will turn on the visibility for those layers and turn everything else off. So that's what I want in this case. Notice you can also do the same with timeline visibility too. The last thing I want to point out is the layer setting window. You can get to that either with this button here or just by double-clicking a layer. There's a lot of settings here that we'll cover as they come up, but you'll see a lot of things we already covered, like the layer color and tags and comments and the layer name itself. You'll also have different tabs appear depending on the layer type with a ton of extra settings. I just wanted to point this out because Moho puts a lot of functionality in here, more than you would find in other programs. So if you're ever trying to figure out how to do something, don't forget to check the layer settings to see what options you have here. The only thing I really want to point out at this point is this visibility checkmark. This is not the same thing as the layer visibility here on the palette. It's easy to see the difference if we switch the timeline to the sequencer view and come out a little ways on the timeline. So look at this layer. If I hit the eyeball, the whole layer goes away. But if I change the visibility in the layer settings and hit apply, it just hides the layer's contents starting at that point on the timeline. I can even go later and turn visibility back on in the middle of the animation. So just keep those two kinds of visibility straight and don't use one when you mean the other. So that's it for the layer palette. Next, we're going to quickly cover the layer tools in the tools palette. We'll do that in the next video. I'll see you there.